Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. My name is Cal Naranya, and on episode 93 of the podcast, I will be discussing my initial impressions of the first two episodes of the new Disney Plus Star Wars series, The Acolyte, and reviewing, it's still wild to me that this is the case, but Bad Boys 4, Bad Boys Ride or Die. The Star Wars Acolyte impressions are going to be full spoilers, so if you haven't seen both of the episodes, fair warning now. Bad Boys Ride or Die will have a non-spoiler review and a full spoiler review. Timecodes for each of these sections of the podcast will be listed in the description. Let's not waste any time because it's almost been a week since the Acolyte premiered, so I want to just cut the nonsense and get right into more Disney Plus Star Wars.
Close your eyes. Your eyes can deceive you. We must not trust them.
All right, as of course it's Star Wars, everybody loves Star Wars. It's unified love for this fandom that we've all grown attached to. I just wanted to say before even getting into it, if you are upset with this show because it stars a African-American woman as the lead and has the main Jedi be somebody of Korean descent, this is not the podcast for you, because quite frankly, I am tired of having to explain why representation is important in popular culture. I'm somebody with a biracial background. My dad was born in Hong Kong and my mom was born in Ontario here in Canada. So I'm not the podcast for you, and you can keep your very exclusive, non-inclusive opinions out of my realm. It's not for you. And based on any of the reactions to the Star Wars content I've covered specifically on YouTube, I ain't got time for trolls. So I don't want to give you any more because, quite frankly, I think it's quite exciting. While also I understand there's going to be hesitancy given how the Old Republic eras of the expanded universe for Star Wars were something that a lot of people held very tightly. For a while, after Return of the Jedi, there wasn't a lot of Star Wars outside of the expanded lore. I respect Disney for choosing their favorite elements of the expanded universe and moving forward with those elements in a new new established version of the canon. The High Republic was originally introduced in the novels, comics, and I don't think there are any audio dramas, but there are also young adult novels as well. I've been slowly compiling all of the audiobooks. That's typically how I absorb fiction nowadays, just because of the way that my time breaks out. I have to commute for work, and so I'm listening to that. I'm almost done the book I'm working on right now, and then I will get started on, I believe it is called Light of the Jedi. Now, I have the wiki here. I probably should just check what it's called. No, it is called Light of the Jedi. I got that right. The Acolyte takes place 100 years before Phantom Menace, and the High Republic, I believe at the start of it was 200. Again, this is not an era that I'm thoroughly invested in. Oh no, it's a 500 to 100. I'm just pulling up the wiki really quickly in front of me so I have the information correct. I like the setup of this show. One element that a lot of people have criticized Disney Plus shows for, Rob Keyes, big fan of the show, friend of the show. Well, I think he's a fan. Hi, Rob. Hope you're doing well. That there needs to be a prestige element to these streaming platform shows, and a lot of them have failed to do so. The cartoons, in my opinion, have done that. I've talked about Bad Batch. Andor obviously did. This show has a lot more realism I think people would be looking for in that regard. There's a lot to this that still does feel like Disney's Star Wars era. However, there are a lot of positives in this. The introduction of all the new characters, I feel, are established quite well. The relationships are interesting, and I'm very curious to see how the backstory is laid out as well as moving forward. If you saw my trailer reactions for this, you know that this is essentially appearing to be the dawn of the Sith in the Star Wars universe 100 years before Phantom Menace. And obviously things just went swimmingly and the Sith never caused any problems after that. I really like Lee Jung-jae as Master Soul. He's discussed the fact that Qui-Gon Jinn was his influence for his character, and you can feel the elements laid through the way that he communicates with everybody and his presence that he has amongst all the Padawans. I love that element of this. My favorite so far is, and this is something you don't really get if you're only a fan of the films, but we get to see the Jedi at their absolute prime peak use of the Force, fighting techniques, and all of the elements that led to them being this essentially police force. I know that's probably edgy to some degree calling them that, but these positive outlook on the galaxy as a whole, and what they led to having a peaceful time in the Galactic Republic. I almost said Empire. That's an entirely different thing that doesn't happen for about 120 years after this. The mystery as to who it's going to be, to me, that's not overly interesting. It's going to be some sort of Sith. I wouldn't be surprised necessarily if it's somebody we know. What's going to sell this show for me personally is the new characters being interesting enough and really feeling the downfall of them, because ultimately these stories that we are getting in any of the eras really are essentially an era of failure. What led to this version of the Jedi Order failing to do their duties? We saw each of those phases through all of the different eras of the movies. There's been 11. And so what that relationship is going to be with the Sith and the conflict that's going to lead to, obviously we know, with Phantom Menace coming 100 years after this, that part excites me. The writing in this does seem to be on a better level than, and I don't like saying this as a shot because I am a huge fan of Dave Filoni. Having three-dimensional characters is important, particularly when they're played by live-action actors. Daphne Keane is an actress I really enjoy. She was obviously amazing in Logan and was quite interesting in His Dark Materials. I really hope she does show up in Deadpool and Wolverine. That would be really exciting. Also, Charlie Barnett as Yord is a really interesting character. I'm very curious to see what the relationships are like with all of these different Jedi Knights, Padawans, and Masters. This being the golden era of the Jedi Order, I'm curious what that means. What are these relationships? Are they really as by the book as they are later on in their lives? Or do we actually get to see some facets of emotion that we don't get to see because they are so essentially priests by the time we've had seen them in the prequel trilogy? So that I'm really interested by. Amandla Stenberg playing two different characters was something that was a phenomenal twist that I thought was really ironic, given how everyone after the first two episodes came out realized there's two of them on the poster. Why was that the case? I found it really funny that in the fall I was reintroducing myself to the Hunger Games franchise, and watching the trailers for this completely forgot the fact that she played Rue in the Hunger Games movie franchise, which I thought was quite funny. If you are a fan of the Disney Plus era of Star Wars, this is going to be a show you're going to enjoy. If you're not and you're looking for something different, I personally feel like this will offer you that. It is, at this moment, has nothing to do with the Skywalker saga at all. These are all brand new original characters. As I've said at the very beginning, and I didn't think I wanted to have to address this, but I'm going to do it anyways. This offers such a unique looking show just based on the cast alone, which in 2024 shouldn't be marked as some sort of praise, but I'm going to do it anyways. Seeing, if you're a kid watching this now, and this is where a lot of this has to be taken into consideration, and something that I feel like is missed when people talk about the prequels, which is that the original trilogy worked well because it worked for kids and adults. I was a kid through the prequel era, and I still didn't like those movies when they came out because I don't feel that they work for kids. A movie about the politics of a trade blockade, not really something that me, a 9-year-old, was really looking forward to at the time, and still doesn't like to revisit when I occasionally rewatch those movies if it's just more for specific instances of reintegration or maybe a detail that somebody has brought out recently. This show for kids now, my kids watching this show, when they do, they haven't yet, are going to see themselves represented, and there are going to be so many kids now in 2024 that are going to see themselves as a Jedi or as a powerful independent character, and undermining what that sentiment will mean to people is unfortunate, and I'm so glad that that opportunity is now being presented to them. More kids growing up with Star Wars and feeling like they could be a part of it means so much, and I hope it continues to do what it does for everybody. I'm hopeful for what this show is going to bring. I know it was one of the things out of D23's announcements and first looks that most people that I spoke to were really excited about. 2 episodes in, I like this. I don't think it's on the same level as Andor or Bad Batch, the 2 main streaming shows we've gotten from Disney+. But I'm very hopeful and excited to see what this story's like. Also, really like the fact that there are 2 versions of the Jedi robes. That sort of ceremonial garb does fit into the idea of this being a powerful religion that also happens to be Knights of Order. I mean, they are the Jedi Order for the Galactic Republic. I like that. I like getting to see some differential costume design. The Jedi robes originally were just something that Ben Kenobi was wearing as a hobo on Tatooine, and the fact that they became the iconic outfit of the Jedi is quite humorous. Let me know if you like the show. It comes out, I believe, every Tuesday evenings. I don't really like that that's the case because I feel like I'm really far behind, but it gave me a chance to watch them a couple times. Obviously, I didn't address the Carrie-Anne Moss thing. I'm still in mourning by that. It certainly was an impactful punch to have Trinity as a Jedi killed off. It does help establish what a substantial combatant May is going to be moving forward, and I'm really curious to see what the dichotomy of Osha and May is moving forward. Does Osha continue to train in the Jedi arts, and maybe there's a fight between them, which would be something absolutely incredible just from a choreographical standpoint and cinematography, where you're going to have to shoot doubles as well as the actor doing the same things as the other characters. So I'm excited for Acolyte. It didn't blow my socks off, but I'm definitely a lot more positive than I think a lot of people are moving forward, but that's what I thought about it. You can let me know on all the social media platforms, or you can email the show. Let's get into my non-spoiler thoughts for Bad Boys Ride or Die.
What you gonna do? What you gonna...
That ain't no Reba song.
It's from her mixtape.
Bad Boys as a franchise is something that was invented in the mid-90s with 1995? 1995 is when the first Bad Boys film came out. We are at the 29th anniversary of this franchise, which is kind of shocking given the gaps in length. Bad Boys for Life, which should have been the title for this. I'm not somebody who necessarily likes when people do that, where they talk about, ironic because I'm talking about Star Wars, where you titled the films wrong. No, they're called what they're called. You can move the titles around. That doesn't mean they fit better with the version of the movie you've summarized in your head. But in franchises like this is an instance where 4, because historically speaking, okay, this is such inside baseball, but if you're listening to this and you don't know, most moviegoers who were general audience members don't like going into films where the numbers are included. If it feels exclusive, where you need to have seen however many films at this point, and this was an era where they were doing that. Bad Boys for Life is a subtitle because of that. It's the irony is it's the 3rd film, and then that the film I'm going to talk about today, Bad Boys Ride or Die, had to come up with something else that didn't have 4 in it. It would have been interesting to maybe have the R on the 4, or the R in or be a 4 somewhat. I always thought it was ironic when the Takens would do that as well, but whatever. I've never actually talked about my fandom of the Bad Boys franchise, so I might as well do that here, which is I quite enjoyed the first one. It was Michael Bay's first film, and you can see a lot of the elements that he would use bringing forward to his other films, particularly the golden sun color of everything, as well as the use of cinematography, spinning cameras, upward Dutch angles and whatnot, and he used those things to some degree very well in that, and then moving forward did not. The main selling point of this franchise has been Will Smith and Martin Lawrence's chemistry. I did a trailer reaction to this, so if you saw that, it was over 3 minutes long because the trailer showed a lot, but shockingly didn't give away too much, which was fun. This is not to be dismissive of this franchise, but as an action franchise, an actual intellectual property, as I'm sure they talk about in the boardrooms, it's a B-level franchise. It's not had films that are up there with the greatest action films of all time. It's maintained its legs, which is shocking. The third film came out in the pandemic and made almost $500 million. And then, shockingly, Bad Boys Ride or Die managed to outdo its box office projections. The theater I saw this with was a Saturday evening. I'm recording this on the Sunday, which was pretty much full, which was quite impressive. This is, for Canadian audiences, a 14A rated film, and it's an R-rated comedy in the United States. And funny enough, similar to the Mission Impossible franchise, which was just kind of single adventures that sort of became, from Ghost Protocol onward, more serialized in its nature, this is the first real sequel in this franchise that has connective material to the previous ones. For Life referenced things that had happened in Bad Boys 2, but Bad Boys Ride or Die, not that it's a part 2, because I think that would be unfair, because it is certainly an original story, but most certainly the character dynamics and relationships that are explored in this film are very much built off of the back of Bad Boys for Life. You have so many returning characters with Vanessa Hudgens, Alexander Ludwig, Paola. I'm hoping I'm saying this right. So Paola Nunez. If that was mispronounced, I'm very, very sorry. And a lot of interesting characters as well. Jacob, Skipo, who played, spoilers for Bad Boys for Life, played Mike Lowry, Will Smith's son, that he was unaware of from a drug. It's a whole thing. I didn't really love Bad Boys 3. I thought the movie was fine. It was a continual... It wasn't a continual. It was another installment in this franchise that I thought was, quite frankly, dead, but Will Smith doesn't really have anything else that he's going to explore. Maybe, ironically, we'll get a Men in Black 5, which will integrate the whole thing. I'm not sure. I would see that. I think Tommy Lee Jones is probably too old for this, but maybe they could do some sort of time travel thing and bring back James Brolin. Or sorry, not James. Although that would be cool. Josh Brolin to play K again, because that was actually one of my favorite elements of Men in Black 3. So for Will Smith, this is his franchise. I'm not going to talk about what Will Smith has done at the Academy stage. That didn't affect my film-going experience of this. I have to say, though, and I'm shocked to be saying this is probably my second favorite of the Bad Boys franchise. The first one is unique because it was the first real R-rated action movie with Will Smith, and that buddy cop duo and the rapport that he has with Martin Lawrence was so funny and unique. Again, looking at the time when you had two leads in an action film that were Black Americans was unheard of, and a gamble, quite frankly, in 1995. It was a different time, and I mean, hopefully we're not going backwards, fingers crossed. The directors, Adil and Bilal, really managed to up the ante from a camera cinematography standpoint. The camera does not stand still in this movie, for better or for worse. It is wild what they are able to do with how they get whatever shots. There's a sequence in the trailer where you do get to follow a gun, which is quite captivating. There are times, however, I do wish the camera was still. I did enjoy that, and I thought the frenetic nature of the staging for all the action sequences, for the most part, is pretty great. There are times it does lean into that incoherentness of Michael Bay, but again, these films don't feel out of place with the rest of this universe. It is certainly one of the better looking films in this franchise. Thankfully, and I'm glad they didn't do this, and it's been an element of this franchise as a whole. This is not a spoiler because it's not in the film, where we don't get the Murtaugh, if you're a fan of How I Met Your Mother, the I'm too old for this stuff. He said stuff. And we do get to play up some different character dynamics that I did really enjoy. However, unfortunately, it doesn't exceed the expectations of another film in this genre. And that's B is not to be, as I've said, Bad Boys, ironic BB. The B-level nature of this really does work. These films know what they are, which is why I wouldn't be rude or critical of it not being on the same level of as another action franchise. This is certainly better than a lot of other installments. This is 4 installments in than franchises typically get. It's ironic that I had Sean O'Connell when we were talking about Die Hard, and this is not a good day to Die Hard. The characters in this still work. Will Smith still works as Mike Lowry as an action hero, and his relationship with Marcus is explored in a way that I found really interesting. And why this movie works more than anything is because it is a real sequel to Bad Boys for Life. I enjoyed this a lot. I thought the action was fun. The comedy really did work for me. And getting to continue the established relationships, particularly in 3, make this feel a lot more cohesive than if this was just a one-off. Serializing this franchise was a really smart idea. It does have all the staples of this franchise you would know and expect, and that's not a bad thing. This movie succeeds on exactly what it's supposed to do. It's funny, it's entertaining, it's captivating, and they want you to be in awe of how the camera moves around. Look at this incredible drone shot. This movie's never going to be boring. And for that, it works. If you are a fan of this franchise, I think you are going to get probably the best looking and most thought out version of this outside of 1, which is why I said what I said about how I would rank them. I guess I should probably just say that. So Bad Boys 1, just on being the original film in this franchise, would be my number 1. My number 2 would be Bad Boys Ride or Die. I'm shocked that I'm saying that. My third film in this franchise would have to be Bad Boys for Life, because it was made with more modern sensibilities and it's coherent to watch, where Bad Boys 2, ironically, Michael Bay returning to it, doesn't do any of the things, or he overdoes the things that worked in Bad Boys 1. Bad Boys 2 is just more Bad Boys. It's bigger and it's not better. So that's how I would rank them. It'd be Bad Boys for Life, Bad Boys. No, I just did that. Do you see what I did? It'd be Bad Boys Ride or Die, Bad Boys for Life, and then Bad Boys 2. That's how I would rank them. I'm going to do something a little different in spoilers to kind of explain how I think the story worked, where we're just going to kind of go through bullet points of the plot, and then I can get into the overall specifics of why it works for me. All right, so that will do it for my non-spoiler section of the review. There's going to be a brief sound clip, and then it's full spoilers for Bad Boys 4.
I need nasty Mike. Bad boy.
Bad Boys 4 starts off with them racing to another thing. This is ironic because I don't want to compare this to the Fast and Furious franchise. This franchise, in my opinion, still hasn't had its Fast 5, where you can go, that's the definitive, we've officially made this like an amazing S-tier action franchise, and then kind of peter off after that. Well, not peter off after that. I like 6, I like 7, 8, 9, and 10 are kind of a mess. Hobbs and Shaw's fun, I guess. But in Bad Boys for Life, we had them racing to see Marcus's grandchild be born, and then in this one, we're racing to Marcus's wedding, or not Marcus, Mike Lowry's wedding, which is interesting. It is a criticism I have, though, which is his physical therapist from when he was shot in the previous one. They're really hammering forward these connective tissue. If you didn't see For Life, you're kind of lost. I think they do enough to mention it, but it's really, these films are sequels. They happen before and after each other. And I like Christine as a character. We don't get a ton from her. it's interesting enough that Mike is getting married if you followed these films all the way through. He was a womanizer. Gabrielle Union, I believe, was his love interest in Bad Boys 2. Yeah. And she was Marcus's sister, and it didn't work out. And the main crux of the story is that there's an element of the police department, the mayor's office to some degree, and the Mexican drug cartels that have predated or gone back and made Captain Howard, or Conrad Howard, their former captain, implicit in the cartel smuggling drugs back into Miami, obviously it being a hotbed of Latinx communities and whatnot, and drugs have always kind of been a mainstay of this universe. So the connective tissue is really interesting because they do bring up elements from the previous films. There is a straight up callback to Bad Boys 2. They bring up the incident with the Haitians in 2003. And I like that callback. I do like that all of the mainstay characters that were introduced in For Life are still in this, where Rita is still the captain of the police department. Alexandra Ludwig and Vanessa Hudgens characters are back as members of Ammo. Although the third member is gone. What was his name? His name is Charles Melton. He's not in this, which is unfortunate, but I honestly don't think there would have been any time for him at all, given how we don't really have them very much. They're at the wedding, and then they're only in a couple of sequences. The main crux of this story, and why I feel that it really does work, is Marcus he's a grandfather now at this point in his life, and obviously has been a dad, and his relationships to his kids have always been a crux of his character. He doesn't want to die, and why he's threatened to be retired, because he was a dad, he was a husband, now he's a grandfather of this child. And that element moving forward into this one really does affect his relationship with Mike and Mike's son from his from his previous relationship that predates all of the films in general. And Mike's relationship with Armando is quite interesting. There's almost a general rule in fiction where if a character kills people, that there's always going to be some sort of karma to that. For the most part, this follows it, but this does really heavy-handedly do that redemption arc with him to some degree, where they need him to help clear the captain's innocence because he knows who was actually involved in the smuggling and the paying off of the police department. And of course, as you would expect, you get Ian Grufford, aka Mr. Fantastic from the 20th Century Fox's first attempt at the Fantastic Four, shows up, and I was so desperately hoping he was not going to be a bad guy, but then of course he is, because why would they introduce the love interest of Rita and not make him a scumbag? I do like the fact that she gets to beat him up, because that does give her character something interesting to do, her feeling completely betrayed, and her previous relationship that we don't actually see in For Life, but that Mike had at some point with her, has made her hesitant about finding love in general. And so that was interesting. The on-the-run nature of this I found a little funny, because similar to I wouldn't even call it a misconception. It's an accurate representation where Ethan Hunt in the Mission Impossible films is always going rogue, and I feel like the Bad Boys, outside of maybe one, but maybe I'm misremembering that, always do that as well. But they do straight up just get framed in this film, and they're on the run with Armando. And having Marcus be there to try to alleviate the pressure between Mike and Armando works. I think it's genuine, and it's presented in a way where he's like, dude, I've been there, I've done this, let me help you. Because Mike has been such and I don't say this to be rude, but he's been a selfish individual. He's always been worried about himself. Where that relationship doesn't work, and I don't think it's given enough time, it feels even less established than something in Iron Man 3, which is Mike starts to have panic attacks. And why I feel this doesn't work is because we don't really know Christine, and it would make more sense if Armando wasn't a bad guy, but because he now feels he has somebody to lose, he can't do his job properly, and he starts having panic attacks. When the character has just been introduced to us, I think the execution suffers because as an audience member, we don't really know her and we don't have an appreciation for their relationship outside of their wedding, which, I mean, I've had one. Those are an amazing, momentous occasion. They're not a representation of your real life relationship. They don't cover the day-to-day, the mundane to some degree. If it was a character we knew already, then maybe it would have worked better. I do like that Marcus, having his near-death experience in this film, has a complete shift, and he's not unlike the Marcus we've seen before, where he feels like he can't die, which is really funny, and it allows Martin Lawrence to be more comical in his action sequences than failing to be a badass. They do play with their age a little bit. Both of these guys are in their late 50s, where he's not using his glasses, and I do like that degree because Marcus, while being the less athletic of the two of them, is still a competent police officer. And so that dynamic is fun that they play with. Overall, the mystery is fine. It's not shocking who's going to be the bad guys in this. I thought that Eric Dane was a good, cold-blooded killer. They don't really give him anything to do. He shows up and he's like, I'm the bad guy. I'm here to be bad. And in Bad Boys films, it's good if you're good to be bad, or bad if you're bad to be bad. I'm not sure if that sentence made any sense. I hope it made sense to you guys and girls and thems and theys. So Bad Boys, Ride or Die, it's a fun movie. I enjoyed it. I recommend checking it out. It certainly works well on the big screen. An example of this film is why big blockbuster action films look different in the theater. There's been a couple that I've seen on streaming where I don't think they would necessarily work on the big screen, but these are made as big spectacle films. I was joking with friends of mine after I saw this that I would have to go back, but I'm fairly certain with each installment in this franchise, we have gotten closer and closer to that Miami sign, to where in Bad Boys 5, which I'm assuming we're going to get after the smash success that this was, where we're just going to barely be able to read it because I found that quite funny. It's a fun, entertaining action film with two charismatic leads whose chemistry still seems to work, which I find incredibly shocking almost 30 years into this franchise. If you did see Bad Boys, let me know. But before we end the show, let's jump on to Question of the Week responses. This week's Question of the Week was, what is your favorite Bruce Willis film? Mike, I believe first-time writer, thank you for writing in, Mike. I truly do appreciate it. Said Armageddon, and a little shout out to Rugrats Go Wild. On TikTok, JM Forch said the episodes of Friends he starred in. That is quite funny. I do appreciate that. I'm just making a last minute check to make sure I don't miss anybody's comments. Dylan Pollock, my favorite Bruce Willis film and arguably my favorite film is Die Hard, nearly a perfect action movie. And I don't think I cast anyone as young Ash for prequel Evil Dead, just include the other characters in the past. Jermaine Jones, Pulp Fiction is the best movie he has been in, but my favorite Bruce Willis movie is Die Hard. Isn't that semantics, Jermaine? But whatever. Shane Southpaw wrote in Sin City. Stephanie wrote in, I'd have to say Sixth Sense, but probably just because I remember how scared and surprised I was at the twist at the very end. And then Sam McLennan wrote in with Unbreakable. First instance of Unbreakable. I was surprised by that. This week's Question of the Week is, and I'm hoping this isn't controversial, but it might be, based off of these films that I reviewed today. What is your favorite Will Smith movie? He's been acting for 30 years at this point, if not more, in the theatrical realm. So I'm curious, what is your favorite Will Smith movie? I look forward to hearing your answers. You can submit them on any of the social media podcast posts, as well as emailing the podcast, filmreelistspod@gmail.com. Next week's episode of the podcast will be a review of Inside Out 2. I am very nervous for this. Inside Out is my favorite Pixar movie of all time, so I'm really hoping that they manage to recapture that magic. I'm taking my kids to see it. I'm really hoping they enjoy it, and they might have a cameo on next week's episode. You'll have to wait and see and make sure you're subscribed on your podcast platform. My name is Kyle Naranya. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, and I hope to see you next time.